My name is Phyllis Monroe. I'm 68 years old, a retired literature teacher from Oregon. Most days, my house is quiet enough to hear the kettle click off before the steam rises. I've been a widow for 6 years, but I still wake up on the right side of the bed, his side. I tell myself it's habit, not loneliness, but I know better. You don't lose a person like Richard and just go back to living. You adjust, one quiet inch at a time. That Saturday, I decided to visit my son. David had been asking me to come over and see their new living room decor. His wife, Vanessa, loved redecorating. She called it modernizing. I just smiled when she said that word, the same way I did when people said, "You must be so proud of your son." I was proud once, then proud turned into patient, and patient slowly turned into quiet. The sun that morning felt too bright, like it had forgotten what grief looked like. I packed a small box of jam I'd made, tied it with a ribbon. I wanted to bring something sweet, something to fill the silence that always seemed to hang between David and me now. When I stepped into their house, the air smelled of lemon polish and new paint, the kind of smell that erases what came before. Vanessa greeted me first, her smile wide and practiced. "Oh, Phyllis, you came," she said, her hand soft and cool on my shoulder. David was somewhere in the back, his voice muffled. I glanced around, looking for the familiar, a book, a clock, a piece of us. That's when I saw it. Above the fireplace where my wedding photo once hung, there was a new frame. A glossy, oversized picture of David and Vanessa on a yacht, champagne glasses raised against the sunset. My heart didn't break. It just paused, the way a song does before the next line. I walked closer. The spot on the wall still showed a faint outline where my old frame had hung for years. I used to stand in front of that photo with Richard every Christmas. He'd joked that the wallpaper had grown attached to us. Now, even the wall looked cleaner, brighter, as if we'd never been there. David came up behind me, rubbing his hands. "Mom, we decided to change things up. Time to modernize, right?" Modernize. There it was again. The same word that means erase but sounds polite. I smiled, a small, fragile thing. "Of course," I said. "It's your home." Vanessa tilted her head, her earrings catching the light. "Oh, don't worry. We kept your frame in the garage. You can take it if you want. It's vintage." Vintage. Another word for outdated, forgotten. So I nodded. "I'll take it, just to keep it safe." I didn't let them see my hands tremble when I carried that frame to the car. The glass was cool against my skin, the way Richard's hand used to feel on winter mornings. On the drive home, the road blurred with sunlight. The frame lay beside me on the passenger seat, wrapped in a towel. It almost looked alive there, like it was waiting for something. I caught myself whispering to it at a red light. "We're going home, Richard." When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a while, staring at my reflection in the windshield. A 68-year-old woman with silver hair and too much quiet around her. My son had replaced my wedding photo like I never existed. But I didn't cry. I just smiled, the same way I did when people thought I couldn't feel pain anymore. At home, I placed the frame on my kitchen table. The glass caught the late afternoon light, scattering it across the room. I ran my fingers along the edge, tracing the dust. Something fell off. The back of the frame was uneven, like there was something trapped inside. I fetched a small screwdriver from the drawer. As I worked, a faint sound came from within, a soft click, like paper brushing wood. My heart slowed. I loosened one corner, then another. The back panel shifted slightly, and a folded piece of yellowed paper slipped out, landing near the sugar bowl. I stared at it for a long time before touching it. The handwriting on the outside was familiar, impossibly familiar. "To Phyllis," it said. My breath caught in my throat. Richard had been gone for 6 years. I picked up the paper with both hands, afraid it would crumble. It smelled faintly of cedar and dust, like the old study where he used to spend evenings writing. My eyes blurred as I unfolded it, the words pressing themselves into me before I even finished the first line. "If you're reading this, P, it means I didn't fall." I sank into the chair, the room turning smaller, heavier, the light fading into something colder. The house around me disappeared. There was only that letter, that voice, that truth waiting in the dark. He hadn't fallen. He was pushed. The scrap of paper felt like a small animal in my hands, warm from the years it had been folded, fragile at the edges, carrying the weight of someone else's breath. I had not expected to find anything more than glass and old photograph. But the house keeps secrets, and sometimes it chooses strange ways to return them. I read the first line so slowly I could have spoken each word aloud as if it were a prayer. "If you're reading this, P, it means I didn't fall." The sentence landed like a stone. For a long moment, the kitchen filled only with the sound of the clock and the distant hum of my refrigerator, and the world narrowed to ink on paper and the shape of my own hands. I pressed the letter to my chest without thinking, like it might be torn away if I let it fall. Richard's handwriting had always been careful, like a man laying down a path for someone else to follow. There were small loops at the T's, a habit he'd had since his school days. Even his slanting corrections were familiar. I could hear him, if not in sound, then in the way the words were arranged. Sitting at his desk, the lamp low, the house quiet except for the tick of an old clock. He wrote to me the way he'd loved me, plainly, with pauses in the places where the heart needed time. He did not say the word murder in that first line. He used other things, softer at first, as if he were easing me into something too sharp to take all at once. He said he was afraid, that there were threats he could not ignore, that there were nights when he woke to shadows near the stairs. He begged me in the way only he could not to let things die in embarrassment or shame. He asked me to look beneath the painting if I ever thought there was more to the story. Beneath the painting, the phrase reached back to the corner of my memory where the night of his fall sat like a film negative, blurred, backwards, colors bleeding into one another, ambulance lights, the smell of disinfectant, a blanket folded poorly over a man who had been so full of life. Vanessa's voice that night had sounded like an animal, too fast, too sharp. She'd been hysterical, then steady, then talking to someone on the phone with a tone that didn't belong to morning. David had stood by the doorway, hands in his pockets, small and slack, trusting whoever told him what to think. When I first found the letter, I read it once, then twice, then 3 times. Each read a small, controlled unpeeling of grief. The second paragraph said Richard had been worried about signatures, insurance papers, some late-night coaxing from Harlan Cooper. He worried, he wrote, that he had been led into something he did not understand until it was too late. He mentioned a conversation in a car, a name muttered over the hum of an engine, a promise made with the casual cruelty of guaranteed outcomes. He wrote, plainly and without flourish, that if anything happened to him, I should not accept the world's first answer. It is strange how anger arrives after shock. At first, I only felt a cold certainty, the sort of knowledge that settles like frost and makes you move carefully because everything is brittle. Then a heat came, sharp and quick, at the thought of his voice being silenced and the world nodding and calling it an accident. I imagined a dark hand pushing him, a shove that would become a forgotten bruise beneath the new wallpaper, an explanation wrapped in a hospital report and the mechanical sympathy of neighbors. In the margin of the letter, tucked as if an afterthought, there was one short sentence that read, "Look beneath the painting." I set the paper down on my kitchen table and stood up too fast, the chair scraping the floor like a tiny alarm. My mind began to string images together the way a seamstress sews beads onto a dress. Small, careful, one stitch at a time. The outline on the wall at David's house. The way the new frame didn't quite match the paint. The oddness of a family willing to move a memory to the garage and wrap it as if it were something to be disposed of. The letter felt like an accusation and an invitation all at once. I remembered a sound from that night that I had tried to forget. The soft, metallic scrape of something brittle being pushed aside. The awkward, hurried footsteps that didn't belong to an old man. I remembered my son's hands, how they had been closed around nothing and then opened to accept what he was told. Memory is a strange room with doors that open and close when they choose. I thought of Harlan Cooper, the name Richard had written and underlined twice. Harlan was a lawyer with a smooth voice and easy eyes who had come around of late, always with a reason to talk about settling things, about making arrangements that would keep us comfortable. I remembered Richard's irritation when Harlan suggested a new beneficiary clause and the way he had laughed it off. But that laugh had been short, and it had left a space where worry could sit. There was more to the letter. Richard had written about a voice, not loud, but familiar in its menace. He said he had the sense, the night before he died, that someone was watching him climb the stairs. He had left instructions about his desk, about the book on the top shelf, the music box that played a lullaby when wound, little things he thought I might not notice until he was gone. He did not want me to leave things to chance. As the afternoon thinned into a blue that makes the kitchen feel like a photograph, I found myself placing the letter back into the frame, under the photograph as if it belonged there. The logic of it was practical. The motion felt sacred. I wanted the paper to be with him, to be kept in the place where he had been happiest, because that is the sort of small rebellion we are allowed when we are the last keepers of someone else's life. For the rest of that day and into the evening, I did the ordinary things, the kettle, the dishes, the slow folding of towels that keep you inside a life rather than staring at what has been taken from it. But the letter moved like a tide through my day, lifting and lowering and shaping the edges of everything. I called Edgar Kent before dinner because the letter was more than a private confession. It was a map. Edgar's voice on the other end of the line was low and steady. "Bring it to me," he said without a question. "Bring everything." That night, I lay awake watching the dark move around my bedroom, the letter folded on the bedside table like a soft-edged threat. Images of Richard fell into my head, his hand reaching for mine across the breakfast table, the crease of his laughter at a line in one of the poems he loved. In the quiet, I heard him as clearly as if he were sitting beside me. The letter had given him a tongue. We do not get to choose how the truth arrives. Sometimes it comes wrapped in small papers that fall out from behind frames, like secrets that have been stored and forgotten, waiting for someone who will look. I had been looking, perhaps not with the urgency I should have, but looking nonetheless. The discovery of that line and the command to look beneath the painting changed the geometry of my days. It folded the past back onto the present and gave me a road to walk. I slept poorly, buoyed and hollow both. When I closed my eyes, there was the memory of ambulance lights and a bed that would not hold the man who had spent a lifetime building a small, stubborn happiness. In the morning, I would begin the walk that Richard had sketched for me with his careful hand, to find the lawyer's name, to ask questions that people are ashamed to ask, to follow a thread that might lead to an answer. There is a peculiar courage that comes from understanding you have been wronged. It is not the loud kind that the movies show. It is quieter and steadier. It is the kind that lets you put one foot in front of the other, even when the ground has been pulled from beneath you. I folded the letter, slid it back under the photograph, and closed the frame gently, as if closing the lid to a box that held the heart of someone I loved. The next morning, I would carry that box to Edgar. I would say the words out loud that the paper had given me. I would ask how one proves that a man was pushed and not merely unlucky. I did not know yet the answers, but standing there, in the dim glow of my kitchen, with my husband's words in my hands, I felt something awake in me that had been asleep for a long time. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I had already packed the letter in a small envelope. I slipped it between 2 pages of an old poetry book, as if hiding a secret inside another secret. My tea sat untouched on the table, the steam curling into nothing. I was aware of every sound in the house, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the wooden floor, the whisper of my own breath. It felt like the world had tilted just a little, the way it does when you finally stop pretending not to know. Edgar Kent lived on the edge of town, in a small house surrounded by tall pines. He used to come by with Richard every Friday for coffee and chess. They had known each other since their police days, back when truth still meant something. I hadn't seen him in nearly 2 years, but when he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't need an explanation. "Come in, Phyllis," he said, his voice low, like a man already bracing for bad news. I followed him inside. The place smelled of old books and rain. He gestured toward the armchair by the window, the same one Richard used to sit in. For a moment, I almost turned away. I placed the envelope on his coffee table, next to his magnifying glass and a half-finished crossword puzzle. "It was behind the frame," I said softly. "He wrote it before he died." Edgar adjusted his glasses, opened the envelope, and unfolded the paper with careful fingers. I watched his face as he read. His eyes moved slowly, his lips tightening, his jaw setting in that familiar way I remembered from his working years. When he reached the last line, he looked up at me, and for a long moment, he didn't say anything. Finally, he leaned back and exhaled through his nose. "It's his handwriting," he said quietly. "No question about it. He used that same ink, too. Mont Blanc, blue-black. Always wrote his reports with it." I swallowed hard. "You think it's real?" "I know it's real." He turned the page over, as if expecting more. "But it won't be enough." The words struck me like a small hammer. "Not enough?" "It's a letter," he said gently. "A man's fear, his suspicion. It's not evidence, but it's a start. If what he wrote is true, we'll find something solid to hold it up. Something that breathes. Something that breathes." I repeated it silently, feeling the shape of the words. Edgar leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Do you remember anyone else involved? A lawyer? Any names?" "There's one," I said, unfolding my hands. "Harlan Cooper. He came to the house a few weeks before Richard died. He said it was about life insurance. Richard mentioned his name in the letter." Edgar nodded slowly. "Harlan Cooper. I'll see what I can dig up. In the meantime, you need to be careful. Don't talk to your son about this yet." "David?" I frowned. "He wouldn't—" "I'm not saying he's guilty," Edgar said, holding up a hand. I'm saying he's married to someone who might be, and right now, that makes him unreliable. The word unreliable stayed with me. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. Edgar stood and walked to a small cabinet near the wall. He pulled out a thin notebook and began to write in his small, precise handwriting, the same habit he had even in retirement, order before impulse. I'll contact a private investigator I trust, he said. Someone discreet. We'll treat this as if it were any other case. No noise, no emotion, just facts. I nodded, though my hands were trembling. He paused, looked at me. Phyllis, are you ready for what might come out of this? I thought about the photo replaced above that fireplace, about Vanessa's smile that never quite reached her eyes, about David's careful silence that seemed to grow heavier each year. I don't know, I said, but I'm ready to stop pretending. For the first time, Edgar smiled. A small, sad smile, like one given at a graveside. Then we start there. We spent the next hour going through every detail I could remember from that night. The time the ambulance arrived, who was home, where Richard had fallen. Edgar listened without interrupting, occasionally jotting notes. He asked about the railing on the stairs, about the insurance papers, about Vanessa's reaction. When I mentioned her phone call after the fall, his pen froze mid-sentence. She called someone? Yes, I said. But I didn't hear who. I just remember her saying, "It's done." I thought she meant the ambulance had come. But now, Edgar nodded slowly, tapping his pen on the pad. We'll need to know who that call went to. He looked up, his eyes sharpening. Phyllis, can I keep the letter? I'll have it analyzed. Date, paper type, ink composition. It'll give us a timeline. I hesitated, but then handed it over. Take care of it. I will, he said. It's not just paper anymore. It's a map. When I left his house, the clouds had gathered low over the pines. The air smelled of metal and rain. I stood for a moment on his porch, clutching my coat, watching the sky darken. Somewhere far away, thunder rolled, soft, distant, patient. Driving home, I thought about Richard's handwriting, about the curve of his letters and the steadiness of his hand even near the end. It didn't seem fair that the truth had to wait behind a picture frame, hiding in plain sight while the rest of us kept trying to live like nothing had been taken. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea gone cold. I tried to read, but my eyes kept drifting to the empty space where his chair used to be. The house felt larger now, not because I was alone, but because something invisible had entered it. The weight of knowing. Before I went to bed, I took out the frame again and turned it over in my hands. The glass caught the moonlight, and for a moment, I thought I saw his reflection smiling faintly back at me. I found your letter, Richard, I whispered. I'll follow it wherever it leads. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet resolve took root. The kind that doesn't shout or rush, the kind that grows steady and deliberate, like dawn finding its way through a window. 2 days later, I returned to the house where Richard and I had spent most of our marriage. It had been sitting empty for months, waiting for someone brave enough to unlock its silence. The air inside smelled like cedar and old dust, and the light slanted through the curtains in pale ribbons. Every room still held the echo of a life interrupted, a pair of reading glasses on the mantel, a clock that had stopped at 8:47. Edgar had told me to look for the painting mentioned in the letter. It's not random, he said over the phone the night before. He chose those words carefully. Look beneath the painting. I knew exactly which one Richard meant. It was the large seascape he loved, hanging in the living room above the cabinet where he kept his records. I ran my hand along the wooden frame. The painting was heavy, its corners slightly uneven. When I tried to lift it, something shifted behind it. A faint sound, like paper brushing against plastic. I paused. The room seemed to hold its breath with me. I stepped onto a chair and lifted the frame carefully. Behind it, taped to the wall, was a small plastic pouch wrapped in clear film. My fingers shook as I peeled it free. Inside was a silver USB drive, no larger than my thumb. I held it up to the light. The label, smudged but still legible. RM Audio. For a long time, I just stood there, the drive in my palm, the weight of it far heavier than it should have been. My husband had always hated technology. He typed with 2 fingers and still wrote checks by hand. If he had recorded something, it meant he knew he wouldn't have another chance to speak. I took the drive straight to Edgar's office. His assistant wasn't there that morning, and the place was filled with the quiet hum of old electronics and paper. Edgar looked up as I walked in. "You found something." I nodded and set the drive on his desk. It was behind the painting. He examined it with that same old detective skepticism. "Let's see what Richard left us." He plugged it into his laptop, and for a moment, the screen flickered. Then a folder appeared with one file, dated 6 days before Richard's death. Edgar double-clicked. The audio began with the low hum of the room Richard must have been in, the faint creak of his chair, the rustle of paper. Then his voice filled the office. "If you're hearing this, Edgar, it means I couldn't tell you in person." His tone was calm, steady, but beneath it was something raw, fatigue, maybe fear. "Harlan came again. He wants my signature on the new insurance policy. He said Vanessa insisted, said it was routine, that it protects the family, but I think it protects her." I felt my throat tighten. "She's been nervous lately," Richard continued. "Keeps asking if I've updated the documents. I told her I wanted to wait. That seemed to upset her. She thinks I don't trust her. I want to, but something feels off. I've seen her talking to Harlan outside the garage when she thought I wasn't looking. And last night, I overheard her say something. If he won't sign, he'll regret it." Edgar pressed pause, his eyes darkening. "Play the rest," I said. He nodded and continued. "I don't know if this will mean anything," Richard said. "But if something happens to me, check the stair railing. I heard her mention having it fixed last week. Don't believe the reports too easily. Tell Phyllis I love her. Tell her I'm sorry if I didn't listen soon enough." Then the recording ended. The silence afterward was thick, almost physical. Edgar leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "He knew," he said quietly. "He just couldn't prove it." I swallowed hard. "What do we do now?" "We find Harlan Cooper," he replied. "And we make sure this recording is backed up and authenticated. This isn't just a husband's fear anymore, Phyllis. It's the beginning of a timeline." He removed the USB, placed it into a small evidence bag, and labeled it with the date. Then he made a copy on his system. "Rachel Cho will help from here," he said. "She's a private investigator I trust, used to work missing person cases, sharp as they come. She can trace Harlan's records." I stared out the window. Outside, the sky was the color of tarnished silver. "You think Vanessa knew he made this recording?" "Maybe, maybe not," Edgar said. "But if she did, she'd have reason to panic." I nodded slowly. "Then she'll make a mistake." He gave me a long look. "Be careful, Phyllis. Curiosity can be dangerous when people have something to lose." When I left his office, I drove past the park where Richard and I used to walk on Sundays. The benches were wet from last night's rain. I pulled over, rolled down the window, and let the air in. It smelled like damp grass and pine, sharp and clean. For the first time since his death, I felt something other than grief. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was direction. That evening, I called Edgar to ask about Rachel. He said she'd meet me tomorrow to start the investigation. After I hung up, I sat in the living room, the USB copy resting on the table in front of me. I couldn't bring myself to play it again, but I could still hear his voice in my head, steady and certain. He had known, and now, so did I. I turned off the lamp and sat there in the dark until the light from the street faded to nothing, whispering into the quiet, "I'll finish what you started, Richard." The next morning, I baked a small loaf of lemon bread before visiting David and Vanessa again. It gave me an excuse to come by without raising suspicion. I told myself it was just a normal visit, but my hands betrayed me. They shook slightly as I wrapped the loaf in a parchment paper. I could still hear Richard's voice from the recording, the weight of his calm warning echoing in my head. When I arrived, Vanessa opened the door, looking radiant as ever. She wore a silk robe that caught the morning light, her hair perfectly in place. "Phyllis, what a surprise," she said, her tone bright but guarded. "David's at work. You could have called." "I know," I said, smiling politely. "I was just passing by and thought you might like some lemon bread." She stepped aside, letting me in, the smell of perfume and disinfectant mixing in the air. The living room looked different again. Another rearrangement, another attempt to erase something. I noticed the walls had been repainted a slightly lighter shade of cream. The space above the fireplace, where the yacht photo hung, gleamed under new glass. My frame, my wedding photo, had never existed here. "Coffee?" she asked, dazed, already moving toward the kitchen. "Yes, thank you," I said, my eyes scanning the counters. A few documents were spread near the sink, half covered by a magazine. I caught a glimpse of a name, Pierce Insurance Group, and the words "trust account" printed near the top. Vanessa followed my gaze, too quickly, and slid the papers into a drawer with a nervous laugh. "David's been sorting through old files. He hates clutter." I gave a soft laugh. "He gets that from his father." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I doubt that." The kettle began to whistle. She poured coffee with precise movements, avoiding my eyes. When she handed me the cup, I noticed her hand trembled just slightly. I wondered if she was afraid of something, or of someone. "I've been meaning to ask," I began, keeping my tone light. "Do you remember that lawyer, Harlan Cooper? He used to come by a few years ago to help Richard with paperwork." Vanessa froze for half a second before answering. "Of course. He handled the insurance after everything happened." She took a sip of coffee. "Why?" "Oh, just wondering if he ever got in touch again," I said. I found one of Richard's notes mentioning him. Funny how paperwork lingers long after people are gone. She set her cup down with a soft clink. "No, he hasn't been around. He moved away, I think." Her voice had that careful evenness of someone reciting a line they'd practiced. "Why bring him up now?" I smiled faintly. "Old memories. You know how they sneak up on you." She nodded, but her eyes were restless. A phone buzzed on the counter beside her. She reached for it too quickly, glancing at the screen before silencing it. I saw the name flash just long enough. "Private line." "I should take this," she said, voice low. "It's about the trust." "Of course," I said, rising from my seat. "I'll wait outside for a minute. The garden looks lovely this time of year." I stepped out through the sliding door, the screen clicking softly behind me. The air smelled faintly of wet soil and roses. Through the thin glass, her voice carried, too sharp to be casual, too controlled to be calm. "I told you not to call when she's here," she hissed. A pause. "No, everything's fine. The papers are ready. I just need David's signature." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "The transfer goes through next week. We'll settle the trust, just like before." My stomach tightened. Settle the trust. The phrase sounded like money, large sums of it, moving quietly from one hand to another. When she ended the call, I heard her exhale and collect herself before coming outside. Her smile returned like a mask. "Sorry about that. Business matters. You know how complicated finances can be." "Of course," I said, meeting her gaze. "Richard used to say the same thing. He never trusted automatic transfers. He liked to sign everything himself." She blinked once, caught off guard. "Did he?" "Yes," I said softly. "He believes signatures carry the weight of truth." For a moment, the air between us thickened. Her lips parted, but no words came. Then, as if remembering her role, she laughed lightly. "Well, not everyone's old-fashioned." David's car pulled into the driveway just then, the sound breaking the tension. Vanessa called out cheerfully, "Honey, your mom stopped by." David stepped inside. His tie loosened, his face tired but polite. "Hey, Mom," he said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. "You should have told me you were coming." "I wanted to surprise you," I said. "Vanessa makes such good coffee." He smiled, rubbing the back of his neck. "She keeps this place spotless. I can't even find my own socks half the time." Vanessa laughed too quickly, her eyes darting toward me. "We all have our roles." David sat across from me, unaware of the storm under his own roof. I studied him for a long moment, the way he smiled without curiosity, the way he looked tired even when he tried to appear cheerful. He had Richard's hands, the same strong fingers that could fix anything except people. "I was just telling your mother," Vanessa said. "We've been thinking about settling the trust account soon. Streamlining things, less paperwork." He nodded distractedly. "Whatever keeps things simple." I sipped my coffee and said nothing. The room suddenly felt colder, though the sun was streaming through the window. Somewhere outside, a lawnmower droned, a dull, constant hum that seemed to underline everything unsaid. When I left, Vanessa walked me to the door. Her hand brushed mine as she passed the loaf of lemon bread back to me, untouched. "You're so thoughtful," she said softly. "You always bring warmth wherever you go." I smiled faintly. "And you always keep things tidy." She blinked, unsure whether it was a compliment. "Safe drive, Phyllis." In the car, I placed the untouched loaf on the passenger seat beside me, exactly where the frame had rested days before. The house behind me gleamed in the sunlight, beautiful and hollow. They thought they had replaced everything that mattered: my photo, my place in the family, even the truth. But they had no idea that the truth was already listening. The morning after my visit with Vanessa, I woke to a soft knock on my door. It was Edgar. He looked tired but focused, carrying a manila folder under his arm. "She's waiting in the car," he said. "The investigator I told you about." I set my cup of tea down and followed him outside. A gray sedan was parked at the curb, engine idling softly. The woman in the driver's seat stepped out as we approached. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, sharp eyes that missed nothing, the kind of calm presence that made silence feel safe. "Mrs. Monroe," she said, shaking my hand. I'm Rachel Cho. Mr. Kent filled me in on the situation. Then you already know too much, I said, managing a small smile. Not nearly enough, she replied. Her tone carried no judgment, only quiet determination. Inside, we sat around my dining table, the one where Richard used to spread his papers on Sunday mornings. Rachel opened her laptop and a slim notepad. Let's start from the beginning, she said. Tell me everything you remember about the days leading up to your husband's accident. Her questions were gentle but precise. What time had he fallen? Who was home? What conversations had I overheard in the week before? Each answer felt like pulling a thread from a tightly woven cloth. When I told her about Harlan Cooper, her expression shifted slightly. That name again, she murmured. I've heard of him. He worked insurance claims for several private estates, mostly high-value policies. Went off the radar about a year ago after an internal audit flagged irregularities. Is he alive? I asked. Rachel looked up. That's what we're going to find out. She jotted a few notes, then asked about Vanessa. I hesitated, glancing toward Edgar. He gave a small nod, urging me to speak. Vanessa has always been charming, but there's something under it. Control, maybe. She wants to be admired but never questioned. Rachel's pen paused. And your son? David? I exhaled. He's loyal, to a fault. He believes in his marriage, maybe because he's afraid to face what's broken. He used to talk to his father every week. After Richard died, he stopped calling me for months. I thought it was grief. Now I'm not sure. Rachel's eyes softened. Sometimes love blinds the kindest people first. We went over the recording from the USB. Rachel listened with her head slightly tilted, her fingers motionless above the keyboard. When Richard's voice reached the line about the stair railing, her gaze sharpened. I'll need the case file from the original investigation, she said. Do you still have the incident report? I kept everything, I said. It's in a box in the study. Rachel smiled slightly. Good. You'd be surprised how many truths live in boxes. She spent the next hour reviewing photos and documents while Edgar explained the chain of events as he remembered them. He'd been one of the first on the scene years ago, retired but still respected by the local department. It was ruled accidental, he said. Slipped on the last step, hit his head. Clean report. But the railing, now that's something we didn't look at closely. Rachel nodded, her mind already several steps ahead. We'll start with property records and the insurance policies. If Harlan handled the paperwork, there'll be a digital trail. He was too arrogant to cover everything. I studied her face as she worked. She carried herself with the kind of quiet precision I'd only seen in women who had learned the cost of patience. There was no hurry in her movements, but everything she did had purpose. At one point, she looked up from her laptop. Mrs. Monroe, I'll be honest with you. This is going to take time. Weeks, maybe months. We'll need to verify documents, cross-check bank records, interview witnesses. Are you sure you're ready for that? I've waited 6 years, I said. I can wait a little longer. Her expression softened. Then we'll do this right. Before she left, Rachel handed me her card. Call me anytime. Even if you just remember something small. Sometimes it's the smallest things that change everything. After she drove off, Edgar lingered by the door. She's good, he said. Thorough. Doesn't chase ghosts, just facts. I like her, I said. She listens. That's why I chose her, he replied. She doesn't see cases. She sees people. When he left, the house felt both emptier and more alive. I walked into Richard's study. the late afternoon light spilling across his desk. The air smelled faintly of old wood, and the faint trace of his cologne, long faded but not forgotten. I opened the top drawer and found the music box he'd mentioned in the letter. The small brass crank turned easily, playing a slow, haunting tune. It filled the room like a whisper from somewhere far away. I stood there, eyes closed, listening until the last note faded into silence. On the desk, beside the box, lay a photograph. Richard and David on the porch, laughing at something I couldn't remember. Their smiles were the same. One gone too soon, the other trapped in a life he didn't know how to fix. I ran my fingers over the photo, whispering softly, "We're coming closer, Richard." That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about Rachel's words. Sometimes it's the smallest things that change everything. I remembered Vanessa's phone call, the mention of a transfer, the insurance folder half hidden beneath a magazine. I remembered her trembling hand, and for the first time, I realized something simple and terrifying. Vanessa wasn't just nervous. She was waiting for something to clear, something that hadn't cleared yet. I turned off the lamp and stared into the dark. My husband's letter had woken the past, but now it was the present that frightened me. Because whatever Vanessa had started 6 years ago, it wasn't finished. The next week unfolded like a slow unraveling. Every day brought a new call, a new document, a new thread that tugged at something deeper. Rachel worked quietly, methodically, and by the end of the first week, she'd already built a picture of a pattern that made my stomach turn. She came by early that Tuesday morning with her laptop tucked under one arm and 2 coffees in hand. "You take cream, right?" she asked, as if we were old friends instead of a widow and an investigator chasing a ghost. "Yes," I said, setting the table. "You look like you haven't slept." She gave a dry laugh. "I don't sleep much when things start adding up." She opened her laptop, and the glow of the screen lit her face. Rows of numbers filled a spreadsheet. "These are the financial transfers I traced through Harlan Cooper's firm. After Richard's death, 2 accounts received significant deposits within 10 days of the insurance payout. One belongs to Harlan himself, now closed. The other, hidden under a shell company called Silverline Holdings." "And who owns that?" I asked. Rachel turned the screen toward me. A name appeared. Vanessa Monroe. My breath caught. She used her maiden name? "No, that's the clever part," Rachel said. "It's registered under a middle name and her mother's maiden name. She's been hiding money in an offshore account in the Cayman Islands since the payout." The air in the kitchen thickened. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock, marking seconds that felt heavier than time itself. "How much?" I asked. 400,000, Rachel said. The insurance payout was $500,000. The rest went through Harlan's firm. I sat down slowly. "And David?" Rachel shook her head. "No direct link yet, but his name shows up on a joint savings account created right after the transfer. I think she told him it was inheritance from her family." I stared at the screen, at the tidy rows of figures that somehow spelled betrayal. "He wouldn't have questioned it," I whispered. "He's always trusted her." Rachel leaned back, studying me. "That trust may be what keeps her safe, or what breaks her." She pulled up another file. "There's more. Edgar's friend at the precinct helped me recover archived footage from a traffic camera near your old house. It's dated the night Richard died." My pulse quickened. "What does it show?" Rachel clicked play. The video was grainy but clear enough. The timestamp flickered. 10:42 p.m. The image showed the driveway, faintly lit by the porch light. A car pulled up. A dark sedan. Harlan's model, according to the police report. Then a figure stepped out. Not Richard, not David. A woman in a light-colored coat, her movements brisk, almost impatient. Rachel paused the footage. "Look here." She zoomed in. The woman turned slightly toward the camera. The profile was unmistakable. "Vanessa," I whispered. "She was there after she said she went to bed," Rachel said. "That means she lied in her original statement." The weight of the truth settled on me like cold water. I gripped the edge of the table, trying to keep my voice steady. "She pushed him." Rachel didn't answer. She didn't need to. For a moment, we sat in silence, just the low hum of the laptop between us. Finally, she said, "The railing was replaced the next day. I've already requested the contractor records. If she ordered repairs before the fall, that's premeditation." I nodded, my mind flashing back to the sound of metal scraping that night, the faint echo of something shifting before the crash. "She planned it," I said. "Every inch of it." Rachel closed the laptop softly. "We're close, but not finished. We need to tie Harlan directly to the transfers. That will turn suspicion into proof." "Can we find him?" I asked. "Maybe, but Harlan's been missing for months. His last known address was a rental condo in Tampa. The building manager said he moved out suddenly after a business disagreement. That could mean anything. Or it could mean she silenced him," I said quietly. Rachel didn't respond, but the flicker in her eyes said she was thinking the same thing. She packed her things, promising updates by the end of the week. After she left, I walked into the living room and sat in Richard's old chair. The leather was cracked, the cushion sinking slightly under my weight. On the table beside it lay the small silver key he used to keep for his desk. I turned it over in my hand, wondering what else he might have left behind. The following day, Edgar called. "We've got something," he said. "Rachel sent me a file from the dashcam footage recovered from your garage camera. It was archived automatically to a cloud backup." "What does it show?" "Someone walking up the stairs the night of the fall. You can't see the face, but the shape. It's a woman, about Vanessa's height. There's a shadow behind her, maybe a second person." My heart thudded in my chest. "Can you enhance it?" "We're trying. Forensics says the timestamp matches the one from the insurance file's digital signature, 10 minutes before the fall." I closed my eyes. The timeline was forming like a spine, each piece clicking into place. The letter, the USB, the financials, the footage. Richard's quiet warnings were now a living structure, something solid enough to stand on. That evening, I printed out the account transfers Rachel had found. The numbers looked cold on the page, but I saw what they meant. Every digit was a confession. As I sat at the table, the last light of the day fading through the window, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore. Grief had turned to purpose, and purpose had turned into something steadier than fear. I folded the papers neatly and placed them in a folder labeled with Richard's initials. For the first time in 6 years, I felt like I was keeping a promise. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, one by one, washing the road in gold. I looked at the reflection in the glass, my own face ghosted against the dark. Behind it, faint but certain, I could almost see him, standing where the light met the shadow, nodding once, as if to say, "Keep going." And I would. I would keep going until the truth no longer needed to hide. By the time the next week arrived, the garden behind our old house had begun to wither. Autumn crept through the air, soft and deliberate, the way truth does when it's done waiting. Edgar called early that morning. "He's agreed to see you," he said. "Thomas Delgado, the gardener. He worked for you and Richard for how long?" "More than 10 years, I said. "He left not long after the funeral." "He's nervous," Edgar added. But he remembers something important. The drive to his home was quiet. Thomas lived on the outskirts of town, in a small white house with a faded blue porch and rows of marigolds growing wild along the fence. When he opened the door, his face softened at the sight of me. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, "it's been a long time." "Too long," I said, offering a gentle smile. "You kept this place beautiful." He shrugged. "The flowers don't argue." We sat outside, the wooden chairs creaking beneath us. He poured us both iced tea, his hands rough from years of pruning and lifting. For a while, we just talked about the small things: weather, the town, how quiet everything had become since the world moved on without Richard. Then his eyes grew distant. "You said Edgar wanted me to tell you about that night," he began slowly. "Yes," I said softly. "Only if you're ready." He took a long sip of tea, set the glass down, and looked toward the garden where the wind brushed through the tall grass. "I was working late that evening. Richard had asked me to come by the next morning to trim the hedges, but I forgot some tools, so I came back that night to get them. It must have been around 10. I parked near the gate, didn't turn on the lights. I didn't want to wake anyone." He paused, rubbing his thumb along the rim of his glass. "When I walked past the house, I saw the living room light still on. I thought Mr. Monroe was reading again. He used to sit there with that little lamp, remember?" I nodded, afraid to interrupt. "But then I heard voices," he continued. "Not his, a woman's voice, angry, sharp. She was saying something like, 'Just sign it.' Then a man answered, low. I couldn't hear what he said. I thought maybe it was one of those insurance people again. They'd been around all week." He swallowed hard. I moved closer, just enough to see through the side window. I saw Mrs. Vanessa standing near the stairs, holding something. Looked like a folder, maybe. Mr. Richard was at the bottom step, facing her. They were arguing. Then another man came out from the kitchen, someone tall, wearing a dark coat. He took the folder from her and said something like, "Let me handle it." I'd never seen him before, but he moved like someone who wasn't afraid to be there. "Harlan?" I whispered. Thomas nodded slowly. "Could be." I didn't know his name, but the voice, it was smooth, like someone used to talking people into things. I didn't hear everything, but I remember him saying, "Once it's done, you'll have what you want." Then Mrs. Vanessa said, "He'll never agree. He's stubborn." He looked down at his hands, the calluses pale against the glass. Then I heard the crash, loud, like wood splintering. I froze. There was silence after that, a long one. Then she screamed. I felt my throat tighten. "You saw him fall?" "No," Thomas said quietly. "I was too far, but when I came closer, I saw her kneeling by him, crying, calling his name. The other man was gone. I wanted to go in, but I was scared. I didn't want to get involved. I called the police from the road, said there'd been an accident. I didn't give my name." We sat in silence. The garden around us seemed to hold the memory, the hum of the world thinning until all I could hear was the faint rattle of leaves. "Why didn't you come forward?" I asked softly. He looked ashamed. "Because when I came back the next morning, she was there with your son. The police had already ruled it an accident. She saw me at the gate and smiled like nothing had happened. She said, 'Thank you for your call last night.' But I hadn't given my name, Mrs. Monroe. That's when I knew she knew it was me." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it settle into my chest. "She offered me money," he went on. "A week later, an envelope showed up in my mailbox. $500. No note. I quit the next day. I looked at him for a long time, the sunlight bending across his face, the years of guilt sitting heavy in the lines around his eyes. You did what you thought was safest, I said quietly. He nodded once. I still see him sometimes, in my sleep. I wish I'd done more. You're doing it now, I said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I kept this. The receipt from the repair company that came to fix the railing. The date says 2 days before he died. She signed for it. He handed it to me. The paper was worn, the ink fading, but the signature was unmistakable. Vanessa Monroe. I stared at it, the garden spinning around me in soft colors. This will help, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Thomas stood, looking older than his 60 years. I don't need thanks, Mrs. Monroe. I just want him to rest easy. As I left his house, the sun dipped low, staining the sky in shades of amber and violet. The receipt fluttered slightly in my hand as I walked to the car, like a small flag of truth waiting to be planted where lies had grown too long. When I got home, I called Rachel. We have a witness, I said. She listened without interruption. When I finished, she said quietly, That's it, Phyllis. That's the crack we needed. Now we just have to open it. I placed the phone down and looked out the window, the garden outside my own house glowing under the dim streetlight. Somewhere in that golden hush, I thought I heard Richard's voice again, not in fear this time, but in relief. And for the first time, I whispered back, We're almost there. It took me another week before I could face David. I spent those days pacing between fear and resolve, between wanting to protect my son and knowing I had to let the truth hurt him. Rachel's evidence was piling up. Bank transfers, the witness statement from Thomas, the repair receipt. Each piece painted a picture that my heart refused to see but my mind could no longer deny. When I finally drove to their house, the air was heavy with late afternoon heat. The curtains were drawn, though the sun still forced its way through the thin fabric, turning the living room a dull amber. David opened the door, surprised to see me. Mom, he said, trying to sound cheerful. You should have called. I thought it'd be better if I came by, I said. Vanessa appeared behind him, wearing that same serene smile that never reached her eyes. Phyllis, what a nice surprise. David was just finishing up some calls. I won't take long, I said. Just something I need to talk to my son about. Her smile wavered. Of course. She kissed David on the cheek before disappearing into the kitchen. David led me to the couch. Is everything okay? He asked. I looked at him, really looked at him. The faint lines of worry around his mouth, the exhaustion behind his eyes. He was still my boy, the one who used to run barefoot in the garden and fall asleep on Richard's lap. And yet, he wasn't that boy anymore. He was a man living in someone else's version of truth. David, I began, my voice soft, steady. Did you know that Vanessa had contact with Harlan Cooper before your father died? He frowned. Harlan? The lawyer? Yeah, he handled the insurance, didn't he? Why? She didn't just handle paperwork with him. She conspired with him. They manipulated your father into signing documents he didn't understand. His expression darkened. Mom, where is this coming from? From your father, I said quietly. He left a recording. And from Thomas, our old gardener. He saw her that night. He saw a man with her. They argued with your father. Minutes later, he fell. David shook his head slowly, as if trying to dislodge the words. Mom, please. You're remembering things wrong. Dad fell. You were there. You know how dark that staircase was. I also know your wife replaced our wedding photo with her own, I said. She moved my memory to the garage like it was trash. She's been hiding something from you, David. He stood abruptly, pacing. You can't do this. You can't come into my house and accuse my wife of murder. I took a deep breath. I'm not accusing. I'm telling you what your father said, and what evidence now shows. His voice rose. Evidence? What evidence? A letter? Some recording? Mom, grief does strange things. You've been alone too long. Maybe you just need to let this go. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they sounded so much like his father when he wanted to end an argument. Calm, reasonable, wrong. Rachel has documents, I said finally. Transfers to an offshore account in Vanessa's name. Repairs done before the fall. A witness. Are all of those my imagination too? He turned away, rubbing his temples. You're letting that detective fill your head. Vanessa loved Dad. She cried for weeks after he died. Guilt has many faces, I said softly. He spun around, eyes sharp. Enough. You're making things worse. Vanessa's pregnant, Mom. The words stopped me cold. Pregnant? He nodded. We were going to tell you soon. That's why she's been tense. You're accusing a pregnant woman of killing her father-in-law. Do you realize how insane that sounds? The room tilted slightly. Pregnant. A new life beginning in the shadow of one stolen. David, I said carefully, a child doesn't erase a crime. He flinched as if I'd struck him. I think you should go. I wanted to argue, to shake him, to make him see. But instead, I just nodded. All right. I reached for my purse, my hand steadier than I expected. When the truth comes, and it will, remember that I tried to tell you gently. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, one hand resting lightly on her stomach. Is everything okay? She asked, her tone all sugar. David didn't answer. I looked at her, my voice calm. Congratulations, Vanessa. I'm sure Richard would have been thrilled. Something flickered across her face, a crack in the perfect mask. Thank you, she said softly. As I stepped past her, I caught the faintest scent of Richard's cologne. My breath caught, just for a moment. Then I realized it wasn't his. It was hers. She'd kept his bottle, worn it like a trophy. Outside, the air hit me like a wave. I walked to my car, my eyes burning, not from tears, but from clarity. Inside, my hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I stared at their house, the curtains drawn tight, the sunlight falling unevenly across the yard. Inside that house was my son, blind to the storm circling him. I thought of something Richard once told me during one of our long talks on the porch. A lie, Phyllis, isn't destroyed by anger. It's undone by light. He was right. That night, I sat in my kitchen with the lights off, the only glow coming from the small lamp near the photo frame. I turned it over in my hands, the one that had hidden his letter. Light, I whispered. Then light it will be. Rachel called the next morning. He didn't believe you, did he? No, I said. But he will. Good, she said quietly. Because we're ready for the next step. And with that, I realized the path ahead was no longer just about proving Richard's death. It was about saving my son from the woman who had built her life on the same lie that killed his father. That night, the rain came quietly, without thunder or warning, just a soft, steady rhythm tapping against the window panes, like fingers remembering a song. I couldn't sleep. The house felt too large, too full of the echoes I'd tried to outgrow. Every clock tick sounded like a footstep from a memory that refused to leave. I made tea, though I didn't drink it. I just needed the motion. Boil, pour, wait. Something to keep my hands busy while my heart refused to rest. When I finally sat down, the radio on the counter flickered to life. A low, trembling voice filled the kitchen, followed by the first few notes of an old tune I hadn't heard in years. Blue Moon. Richard used to hum it while fixing the kitchen shelves, pretending not to know the words. I'd tease him that he sang off-key, and he'd grin, saying, "Then you'll never forget it's me." The sound wrapped around me like a ghost of warmth, a melody stretched thin by time. I reached for the old photo frame on the table, the one that had started all of this, and traced my fingers along the edge. The glass was cool beneath my fingertips. My reflection stared back, faint and tired. The picture inside was the one from our wedding. Richard's eyes caught the light the way they always had, sharp and kind all at once. My veil had been slightly crooked that day, and he'd whispered, "Perfect, just like that." For years, that photo had been our quiet witness, proof that love, once real, leaves a shape even when it's gone. I lifted the frame and turned it toward the light. Something shimmered near the bottom corner, an empty space where his wedding ring had once been glued to the mat behind the glass. It was gone. My heart clenched, sudden and sharp. I remembered the last time I'd seen that ring. Richard had slipped it off one evening, his fingers swollen from working in the garden. He'd left it beside the photograph, saying, "If it ever disappears, Phyllis, it means someone wants more than I can give." I stared at that hollow space and felt the tears come. Not loud, not sudden, but quiet and unhurried, the way truth grieves when it finally finds air. In that moment, I didn't feel brave. I didn't feel clever or strong. I felt old, tired, and small, just a woman sitting in a kitchen too quiet for the living. I pressed the radio's volume knob until the music softened, just enough to let me breathe through the ache. The lyrics floated faintly through the air, a thread connecting two worlds, his and mine. Blue moon, you saw me standing alone. I closed my eyes, imagining Richard sitting across from me, his coffee cup steaming, that soft half-smile he always wore when he wanted me to stop worrying. "I miss you," I whispered. "I found your letter. I'm trying to make it right." The house answered only with the sound of rain, but in that silence I felt him, like warmth radiating from somewhere beyond reach. I stood and walked to the window. The sky was a deep navy, the rain thinning to a mist, and there, breaking through the clouds, was the faint glow of a full moon, its edges blurred by fog, its color pale and ghostly, yet familiar. "Blue moon," I murmured. "You always did find me." The street outside glistened with puddles. A single car passed, its headlights catching the glint of my garden wind chime. For a second, the light flashed across the frame in my hands, scattering against the glass like broken stars. That's when I saw it, the faint reflection of something inside the frame's backing, an uneven shadow beneath the paper lining. My pulse quickened. I set the frame down gently and pried open the back. Another piece of folded paper fell out, smaller than the first. Inside, in Richard's familiar handwriting, was a single line. "If truth ever frightens you, follow the music. It knows the way home." The paper smelled faintly of cedar and rain. I pressed it against my lips, then folded it carefully, slipping it into my pocket. I walked to the old record player in the corner, one that hadn't worked in years. When I lifted the cover, I noticed the faintest etching near the base, a name scratched into the metal. Harlan. My breath caught. He'd left his mark there, hidden in plain sight, inside the thing Richard loved most. It wasn't just nostalgia anymore. It was evidence, waiting to be seen. The rain stopped completely then, as if the world itself had paused to listen. I looked at the frame again, the missing ring, the soft gleam of the moon outside, and felt a strange calm settle over me. The pain was still there, but it no longer frightened me. It was part of the path, part of the light Richard had asked me to follow. As the song faded to its final note, I whispered to the empty kitchen, "They erased us, but I still see you." The clock ticked once, steady and clear, and somewhere in that stillness, I could almost hear his voice, low and certain, "Keep going, Phyllis. You're almost home." Morning came softly, gray and thin through the curtains. The night had left me hollow but lighter somehow, like the rain had washed something clean inside me. The frame still sat on the table where I'd left it, the moonlight long gone, replaced by the fragile gold of dawn. I could still hear Richard's words from the note. Follow the music. That sentence wouldn't let me go. It circled my thoughts as I brewed my coffee, as I paced the living room, as the world outside woke up without knowing how much mine had changed. Finally, I gave in and went to the study, the room that had stayed locked since the funeral. Dust covered everything like a thin gray veil. His desk was still as he'd left it, books stacked neatly, pens arranged in a line, and that little wooden box that played the tune from our wedding. I hesitated before winding it. The melody began, soft, hesitant, like an old voice remembering the words. And then, as I reached to close the lid, I noticed something strange. The inside of the box was lined with a piece of velvet that wasn't quite smooth. My fingers brushed against a seam that didn't belong. I lifted the lining, and beneath it was a small folded envelope, the paper yellowed at, the edges but dry, untouched by time. It was addressed to me in Richard's handwriting, the same slow, deliberate script that always looked more like a conversation than a note. I unfolded it carefully. The ink had faded slightly, but his words were as clear as if he were standing beside me. "Phyllis, if you found this, then what I feared has happened. Harlan's been pressing harder. He knows about her past, the child she lost before she met David. I think she's desperate to keep that buried. He's using it against her. I've told her we can start over, but she looks at me like I'm already gone. If anything happens, don't trust the reports. Don't trust anyone until you find what's missing. I wanted to leave you peace. Instead, I've left you a burden. I'm sorry for that. But truth is, a kind of love too, even when it hurts." The words blurred as my eyes filled, and for a long moment, all I could do was hold the letter against my chest. The air in the room felt different now, alive, charged with the presence of a man who'd tried, in his quiet way, to save us all. When I finally steadied myself, I called Rachel. "I found something," I said. "A second letter." She was at my door within an hour, hair pulled back, her expression focused but soft when she saw my face. "Show me." I handed her the paper. She read it in silence, her eyes narrowing slightly at the mention of the child. "A secret child," she murmured. "That explains the pressure Harlan had over her. He could blackmail her into anything." I nodded slowly. He said she lost the child before she met David. But what if she didn't? What if there's more to it? Rachel opened her laptop and began typing quickly. "Let's see. Harlan Cooper, Florida Bar Association, 2016, 2019. Here. Her eyes flicked over the screen. He was investigated twice for unethical insurance practices but never charged. One of his last cases involved a client named Vanessa Pierce. My heart stilled. Pierce was her maiden name. Rachel nodded grimly. Exactly. It gets worse. Harlan's death was ruled an overdose, but the toxicology report shows 2 sets of fingerprints on the bottle. It was reopened briefly, then sealed. Sealed? I repeated. By a private request, Rachel said, her voice low. Filed by Vanessa Monroe. For a moment, the room went silent except for the faint hum of her laptop. The truth hung between us, heavy and undeniable. Rachel closed the computer. This isn't just insurance fraud anymore. This is a chain. Harlan manipulated her. She panicked. And your husband became collateral. I pressed my hands together, trying to keep them from trembling. So she killed him to cover her past. Rachel hesitated. Or to silence the man who could expose her. Either way, the motive is the same. Fear of being nothing. The same words Vanessa would later use in court. The same fear that had driven her from charm to cruelty, from ambition to destruction. Rachel placed a comforting hand over mine. We'll use this letter to connect everything, but we'll need corroboration, medical records, financials, anything that ties her to Harlan before your husband's death. She stood, pacing slightly. I can access Harlan's old email logs through a private archive. If there's correspondence between them, we'll find it. Do it, I said quietly. Rachel smiled faintly. You're stronger than most people I've met, Phyllis. I'm not strong, I said. I'm just tired of being lied to. When she left, I sat back down in Richard's study, the letter open beside me. Through the window, the afternoon light had turned golden, falling across his bookshelves like a benediction. I reached for his glasses, still folded neatly on the desk, and held them up to the light. They caught the reflection of the window. 2 small, bright circles. He'd known everything. He'd seen it coming. And even from the edge of his own end, he'd tried to leave me the tools to find my way back to the truth. That night, as the sky turned dark, I placed both letters together inside the wooden music box. When I wound it again, the tune seemed softer this time, slower, as if even the song understood what it was carrying now. If truth ever frightens you, follow the music. I closed my eyes and whispered, I'm following, Richard. I'm following. The melody faded, leaving only silence. But it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of promise. By the time Rachel confirmed everything, 2 more weeks had passed. The leaves had started turning, and the days grew shorter, as if the season itself was closing in on the truth. Each morning, I woke before dawn, my heart steady now, my mind clear. The grief that once held me hostage had become something sharper, a blade shaped by purpose. Rachel called that Friday evening. Her voice was calm, but charged with quiet energy. It's time, she said. We have everything we need. When she arrived at my house, she carried a black folder thicker than a Bible. Inside, she said, setting it on the table, are certified copies of the bank transfers, Harlan's email chain with Vanessa, and the forensic report linking her fingerprints to the railing. But that's not the most important part. She opened the folder and slid a transcript toward me. This is from a phone call Vanessa made last week to the insurance company. I've had their internal logs flagged since we opened the case. The printed words ran across the page like poison. I want the old trust dissolved, she'd said. We can't afford anyone asking questions. Just send me confirmation once the funds are clear. I stared at it for a long moment. She's still trying to move the money. Rachel nodded. Which means she still believes she's safe. That's what we'll use. We sat in silence. For a while, the air between us charged with anticipation. Finally, she said, I'm going to pose as an insurance broker, someone representing a private firm willing to buy out her policy. I'll schedule a meeting. She'll think it's a shortcut to getting her hands on the remaining funds. You think she'll bite? I asked, and Rachel smiled faintly. People like Vanessa always do. They crave control and they never expect someone to outsmart them quietly. She turned to me. You'll stay out of sight, but nearby. Edgar and a police contact will monitor from a separate line. We'll record everything legally. It sounded simple enough, but my stomach twisted as I imagined facing her again. The thought of seeing that polite smile, of hearing her voice rap lies in silk, made me feel both sick and determined. Rachel's hand brushed mine. Phyllis, this is justice, not revenge. You understand that, right? I do, I said softly. Revenge ends when it's loud. Justice ends when it's quiet. She smiled at that. Then, let's finish it quietly. The following afternoon, the plan unfolded like clockwork. Rachel met Vanessa at a small cafe near the waterfront, a place bright enough to seem harmless. I watched from my car parked across the street, my heart beating in time with the faint hum of passing traffic. Through the cafe window, I could see them. Vanessa looked radiant as always, elegant, composed, wearing the calm of someone who believes the world is still hers. Rachel, poised and unassuming, slid a manila envelope across the table. I couldn't hear their words, but I didn't need to. Rachel had a tiny microphone attached to her lapel, feeding the audio directly to Edgar's laptop in his car down the block. His voice came through my earpiece, steady and measured. They're talking about the policy. Wait for it. Minutes passed. Then Vanessa leaned forward, her tone sharper now. I earned that money when he died, she said. The words hit me like a slap. For a second, the world tilted. My fingers dug into the steering wheel. I didn't cry. I just breathed. Slow, deliberate. The way you do when the final piece of truth finally fits. She said it, Edgar murmured through the line. We've got her. Rachel stayed calm. Of course, she said smoothly on the recording. And we'll make sure the transfer reflects that. You'll just need to sign authorization. Vanessa laughed lightly. That's what got him killed in the first place. Signatures. Rachel's eyes flicked up, just once. Excuse me? Oh, Vanessa said quickly, realizing too late what she'd admitted. I mean, he was stubborn. He wouldn't. The sound of a chair scraping echoed faintly through the mic. Rachel closed her folder. Thank you, Mrs. Monroe. I think that's all I need. Vanessa's tone sharpened. You said I'd get confirmation today. Rachel stood. You'll get something better. I saw her walk out, calm and unhurried, leaving Vanessa sitting there, confusion clouding her face. Minutes later, Edgar's voice came through again. We're clear. The recording's solid. It's enough for a warrant. I exhaled slowly, my hand pressed against my heart. Outside, the sky had turned pale blue, the air crisp with the promise of change. I watched as Rachel crossed the street toward me. When she opened the car door, she was smiling, not triumphantly, but quietly, like someone who'd just delivered peace instead of victory. She confessed, she said simply. It's over. I nodded, but the words didn't feel real yet. Not until the law says so. And it will, she said. By this time next week, she'll be facing charges. We sat in silence for a moment. A gull cried overhead, circling the gray line of the shore. Then Rachel said softly, "You did it, Phyllis. You didn't let her bury him twice." I looked out the window toward the sea, where the horizon met the water in a perfect, endless line. "No," I said. "Richard did. I just followed his map." That night, when I got home, I placed the 2 letters back inside the music box. I wound it once, just enough to hear the faint beginning of the melody. It sounded different now, fuller, freer, as if it had been waiting for this moment to breathe again. The truth was no longer buried in walls or frames or paper. It was alive, and it was coming for her. The morning they came for Vanessa was colder than usual, the kind of cold that felt like it was waiting for something to end. I woke before sunrise and sat by the window with a cup of tea that went untouched. The light outside was still gray, the street quiet except for the slow hum of wind through the trees. Rachel had called the night before. "The warrant's signed," she said. "They'll execute it tomorrow morning. You don't have to be there." "I do," I told her. "I've missed enough truth already." By 7, I was parked a few houses down from David's driveway. The police cars arrived without sirens, moving like ghosts, 3 of them, unhurried but deliberate. Edgar was already there, standing beside his car with his coat pulled tight, his face carved in quiet resolve. He nodded when he saw me but didn't speak. From where I sat, I could see their front door. I thought about all the times I had walked through it carrying gifts, meals, little pieces of love wrapped in politeness. And now it would open to something else entirely. The knock came. 3 sharp raps that sliced through the morning stillness. Seconds later, the door opened and I saw David appear first, barefoot, half awake. His confusion was plain. Then Vanessa stepped into view behind him, her robe cinched too tightly, her hair undone. 2 officers entered. I couldn't hear their words, but I saw their movements, practiced and calm. One of them handed her a document. Another held up a small bag, clear plastic, evidence inside. Rachel had told me they'd found it in her safe. Richard's wedding ring, still faintly marked with the glue residue from the back of my frame. I felt the air leave my lungs. She had taken it, hidden it, kept it like a token of victory. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tear run down my cheek, cold and slow. Not sorrow, something else. Release maybe, or justice, arriving on its own terms. Vanessa's voice reached me faintly through the glass. "You can't do this," she said, her words sharp, frantic. "This is a mistake." The officer read her rights. Her expression changed. Shock first, then something darker. I saw it clearly when she turned her head, her eyes catching sight of David. He was frozen, still holding the edge of the door, confusion etched into every line of his face. "Vanessa, what's going on?" She shook her head, trying to hold his gaze. "They're lying, David. It's all lies. I didn't." Then her words faltered as she saw the ring in the officer's hand, the one she'd stolen, the one that no lie could explain away. Her shoulders slumped. She didn't cry. She just stared at it like it was something she'd forgotten how to own. David said something then, too quiet for me to hear, and took a step back from her. His hand dropped from the door. His wedding band glinted once in the light, then disappeared as he folded his fingers into a fist. The officers led her toward the car. I stayed where I was, unseen, watching her pass through the same space where I had once stood carrying lemon bread, smiling through the ache of being replaced. As the car door shut, A sound broke from the house, a single, shattering sob. David's. I wanted to go to him, to hold him the way I did when he was little and scraped his knee, to tell him that broken things can still be mended. But this wasn't the moment for comfort. This was the moment for truth to finish what it had started. Rachel walked toward me from the other side of the street. Her coat was buttoned high, her breath clouding the air. She stopped by my window and leaned in. "It's done," she said softly. I nodded, unable to speak. "They found the ring," she continued, "and something else. A ledger in the safe. It details every payment, every transfer. She signed each page. It's over, Phyllis." I swallowed hard, my voice breaking on the first word. "And David?" "He's in shock," Rachel said. "But he'll come around. He needs time to see what you already knew." We stood there for a long moment, the sound of the police cars fading down the street, swallowed by distance. The morning light shifted, touching the trees, the rooftops, the world beginning again. When I finally walked up the path to the house, David was standing in the doorway. His eyes were red, but his voice was quiet. "You knew," he said. "Yes." He looked down, shaking his head slowly. "And you still came today." "I had to," I said. "So you could see." He took a deep breath. "They said she'll be charged. 2nd degree." I nodded. He looked past me, toward the road where the cars had gone. I didn't want to believe it. "I know." He turned his gaze back to me, his voice trembling. "I kept thinking Dad fell because of bad luck, because of time, or age, or maybe fate. But it wasn't. It was her." I reached out, touching his arm gently. "It was both of them, but now it's done." He nodded once, then stepped back, his shoulders heavy with something that looked like grief but wasn't quite that anymore. It was acceptance, slow, incomplete, but real. Before I left, I turned once more toward the living room. The yacht photo still hung above the fireplace. The glass reflected the morning light, making the couple inside it look like strangers. "Take it down," I said quietly. "Let the wall breathe again." David didn't answer, but when I reached the car and looked back, he was standing on a chair, lifting the frame from the hook. As I drove home, the sunlight finally broke through the clouds, spilling across the dashboard. The weight that had lived in my chest for 6 years began to loosen, leaving something quieter behind. At home, I placed the recovered wedding ring on the kitchen table. It glinted faintly in the light, and for a moment, I could almost see Richard's hand beside mine again. "Justice by reason," he used to say, "not rage." And that morning, as the world turned softly toward noon, I finally understood what he meant. The courthouse smelled like varnished wood and old air, the kind of place where truth didn't whisper. It echoed. I sat in the second row, hands folded tightly in my lap, the weight of 6 years pressing behind my ribs. David was beside me, silent, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the front. Rachel stood ahead, her posture steady, composed, ready to deliver what we'd built piece by piece, inch by inch. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table, her hair pinned back neatly, her face calm, almost serene. The performance of someone who believed charm could rewrite the past. But her hands betrayed her. They wouldn't stop moving, fingers tapping, twisting the hem of her sleeve. The trial had been quiet until now. Procedural hearings, motions, delays. But this day, this was the one that mattered, the one Richard's voice had waited for. The judge entered, an older man with kind eyes that had seen too many kinds of sorrow. He nodded once, and the court rose. The air shifted as the proceedings began. Rachel started with the facts. No embellishment, no drama. She let the evidence breathe for itself. The financial transfers, the secret account, the insurance documents signed under duress. She moved methodically, her voice even, her tone the kind of quiet certainty that leaves no room for denial. Then came the witnesses. Edgar took the stand first. His voice was steady, his testimony clean. "I was a detective for 30 years, he said, "and I've seen accidents that never sat right. Mr. Monroe's case was one of them." He glanced toward me briefly, his expression softening. "We missed what mattered then. We don't miss it now." Next came Thomas. He wore his best suit, the same one he said he hadn't worn since his daughter's wedding. His voice trembled only once when he said, "I should have come forward sooner." Then he looked directly at the jury and added, "But I'm here now." Each word was a hammer striking silence into shape. Finally, Rachel played the dashcam footage, the grainy clip that had haunted me for months. The jurors leaned forward as the shadow of a woman appeared on the staircase, her movements deliberate. The timestamp matched perfectly with the insurance digital signature, down to the minute. When the lights came back on, the courtroom was quiet except for the low hum of the ceiling fan. Then came the moment I both dreaded and waited for. Rachel stepped forward, holding a small device. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to play an audio recording recovered from a sealed USB drive found in the Monroe residence." The judge nodded. "Proceed." She pressed play. Richard's voice filled the room. "If you're hearing this, it means I couldn't say goodbye properly. Vanessa has been pushing me to sign the insurance documents. I've delayed, but she's growing angry. I think Harlan's behind it. I've heard them talking. I'm leaving this for Phyllis, in case I don't get the chance to tell her. Truth doesn't vanish, it waits. And I love her, till my last breath." The sound cut off. No one moved. Even the air seemed to hold still, as if afraid to break what the moment carried. I didn't cry. Not there. My tears had already come and gone long ago, when I first found his letter. This was different. This was the part where grief turned into grace. Across the room, Vanessa's composure cracked. Just slightly. A flicker in her expression, the smallest quiver in her chin. She looked down, her eyes wet, her voice low when she finally spoke. "I didn't mean to..." She stopped herself. "He wasn't supposed to..." Rachel didn't interrupt. She didn't have to. The silence did her work for her. The prosecutor closed the case with quiet precision. "This wasn't rage," he said. "It wasn't a crime of passion. It was control, fear, and greed. And yet, today, we're not here for vengeance. We're here to restore the truth Mr. Monroe left behind." The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. The sound that followed wasn't applause. It wasn't satisfaction. It was a collective exhale, a release, years overdue. Vanessa lowered her head. Her voice broke for the first time when she said, almost to herself, "I was scared of being nothing." I looked at her, not with anger, but with something softer. Pity, maybe. Understanding of the fear that had driven her into ruin. "You could have been forgiven," I whispered, though she couldn't hear me. "But you chose silence for the wrong reasons." The gavel struck once. The room emptied slowly, voices low, footsteps fading. David didn't move right away. He just sat, staring at the place where his wife had been. She said she was scared. He murmured. She was, I said. But fear isn't an excuse. It's a crossroads. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Did you ever hate her? I thought about it. Once, I said. But hate doesn't heal. Truth does. He nodded slowly, then reached into his jacket pocket and handed me something. A folded paper. The court returned this to me. Dad's ring receipt. I thought you should have it. I took it carefully, my eyes blurring again. Thank you. Outside the courthouse, the light had changed. The afternoon sun stretched long and warm across the steps, wrapping everything in gold. Reporters gathered in the distance, their cameras waiting, but Rachel guided me quietly through a side door. No statements, she said. Justice doesn't need an audience. As we walked toward the car, I felt the world breathe again. Not loudly, just a long, soft exhale that carried the weight of years and gave it back to the wind. That night, I returned home and placed Richard's ring beside the frame. The house felt different now, lighter, almost forgiving. I poured myself a small glass of wine and sat by the window, the fading light painting the floor in amber. Justice had been served, not by rage, not by revenge, but by reason, by persistence, and by love that refused to die quietly. The truth had found its way home. A full year had passed since that day in court. Though time had stopped moving the same way, it no longer pressed or pulsed against me. It just flowed, like a quiet river I'd finally learned to sit beside. The house was lighter now, not just from new curtains or fresh paint, but from something deeper, something invisible and gentle. Peace, maybe. The kind that doesn't arrive suddenly. It grows, slow as forgiveness. That morning, the mailman left a small brown envelope at my door. Inside was a single document, the official notice that Richard's estate had been fully closed, the final paperwork signed and certified. It wasn't wealth that mattered. It was the word at the bottom, final resolution. I ran my thumb along the embossed seal and smiled. You'd have liked that, Richard, I whispered. Something neat, tied up clean. Later that afternoon, David arrived. I heard his car before I saw it, engine humming, the low creak of the gate as it opened. When he stepped out, he looked different, softer, older, but lighter too, the way people look when they've stopped fighting the truth. In his arms, he carried a small bundle wrapped in blue. Mom, he said, smiling shyly, I brought someone to meet you. He lifted the blanket, and there he was, a baby boy, his eyes wide and calm. This is Richard, he said. Richard Monroe II. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My hands trembled as I reached for the child, his tiny fingers curling around mine. His skin was warm, his breathing slow and sure. He has your father's hands, I said softly. David smiled, his eyes wet. That's what I thought. We went inside, the three of us, the afternoon light stretching through the living room in soft gold. The house, once heavy with silence, now felt alive again. The baby made small noises, half sigh, half wonder, as if the world was still too new to understand. David noticed the old frame on the mantel. You kept it, he said. Of course, I replied. It's the only thing that's never lied to me. He laughed quietly, then hesitated. There's something I found in one of Vanessa's boxes. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, faded, creased, but familiar. It was half of our wedding photo, the missing piece, the side that showed my face. She must have torn it, he said softly. I thought you'd want it back. I stared at it for a long moment before taking it. My younger self looked out from the faded photograph, smiling beside the man who had carried my heart through decades. I placed the torn piece beside the other half already framed. For a moment, I just looked at them. The edges, the colors, the life they'd held apart all these years. Then I reached for the glue, the same kind Richard used to fix everything that broke around the house. Slowly, carefully, I joined the two halves. They fit perfectly, as if time itself had been waiting for me to put them back together. David watched in silence. "He'd like that," he said. "I think so too." I let the picture dry while the baby slept in his father's arms. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, brushing against the windows with a soft sigh. I turned back to the frame and opened the back. Inside, I placed Richard's wedding ring and the second letter he had written. The one that began, "If you found this, then what I feared has happened." Then, just before closing it, I added a note of my own. "The truth never dies. It only waits to be found." When the frame was sealed again, I held it up to the light. The glass caught the afternoon sun, scattering it across the floor in thin golden ribbons. David stood beside me, holding his son. "He'll know someday, won't he?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "But not about the pain, about the courage, about how truth is a kind of inheritance too." He nodded, looking down at the child. "He smiles, in his sleep sometimes. It reminds me of Dad." I reached over, brushing my hand over the baby's tiny cheek. "That's because your father never really left. He just found a quieter way to stay." For a while, none of us spoke. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock and the steady rhythm of a child's breathing, life continuing, unbroken. As the sun began to set, I placed the newly repaired photo back on the wall where it belonged, above the fireplace, the same place it had hung before everything changed. Now, instead of the empty outline, the wall glowed, the photo whole again, the family whole again. David looked at me and smiled. "You did it, Mom. You brought him back." I shook my head gently. "No," I said. "He brought us back." We sat together until the light faded to dusk. The baby stirred once, then settled again, his small hand clutching his father's shirt. The room smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish, the same scent it had the day Richard first hung that photo. I watched the shadows lengthen across the room and felt something close, not like an ending, but a circle quietly completing itself. And for the first time in years, when I looked at that photograph, I didn't feel the ache of what was lost. I felt the calm of what had been found. The morning light was soft and golden, spilling across the living room floor in long, familiar lines. It touched the edges of the picture frame, the one that had carried our story. The loss, the lies, and now the truth. I stood before it in silence, a cup of tea cooling in my hand, the faint hum of the radio filling the house with warmth. A year ago, I would have filled this quiet with thoughts, worry, regret, the endless what-ifs that echo when life doesn't go as planned. But today, I didn't. The silence no longer frightened me. It felt like Richard's presence, steady, certain, enough. The repaired wedding photo hung in its old place again. The two halves joined so cleanly that the tear line had become invisible under the light. Our younger faces smiled back at me, unchanged by time or tragedy. Inside that frame were the things that had once been hidden. Richard's ring, his letters, the truths that had refused to die. I reached out and touched the glass, my reflection faint beside his. "He replaced our photo like I never existed," I whispered. But the truth was never gone. Was it? The house didn't answer. It didn't need to. Outside, a car pulled into the driveway. David stepped out with baby Richard on his hip. The little one waved as soon as he saw me, his laughter ringing through the air like a bell that only called joy. I opened the door before they reached it. "You're up early," I said, smiling. "Someone couldn't sleep," David said, bouncing the baby gently. "He's been saying pa all morning. I think he meant pancake, but I'll take it." I laughed softly and reached for the child. His small hands grabbed at my necklace, his wide eyes curious about everything. "Good morning, my little moonbeam," I whispered. We sat together at the kitchen table, the sunlight slanting across the plates, the smell of butter and syrup filling the room. For a moment, I caught sight of the clock on the wall, its hands moving steadily, unhurried. Time had stopped feeling like a thief. It had become a teacher instead. David poured me another cup of tea. "Mom," he said quietly, "I read Dad's letters last night, the ones Rachel returned to me after the trial." I looked up. His voice was calm but full of weight. "He talked about you, about how he wished he'd listened sooner. He said truth wasn't something we find. It's something we return to." My throat tightened. "He always did know how to put things simply." David smiled faintly. "You were right all along, about everything. I didn't see it then, but..." I reached across the table, resting my hand on his. "It's not about who saw it first. It's about who helped carry it when it was heavy." He squeezed my hand back, his eyes shining. "I'm sorry, Mom, for all of it." "You don't have to be," I said gently. "You found your way back. That's all your father and I ever wanted." He nodded, then stood to wash the dishes while I held the baby. The rhythm of domestic sounds, the running water, the clink of cups, the baby's quiet coos, wove together into something whole again, something ordinary, something beautiful. Later, after they left, I returned to the living room. The light had shifted, the golden tone deepening to amber. I stood before the frame once more. For a long while, I just looked at it. Then softly, I spoke. "Truth doesn't vanish," I said. "It waits, behind every silence, every shadow, every frame." The words seemed to linger in the air, wrapping themselves around the house like a benediction. I walked to the record player in the corner, the one Richard used to love, and placed a new vinyl on the turntable. It crackled once before the first notes began. Blue Moon. The melody filled the house, tender and endless. I closed my eyes, let the rhythm move through me, and for the first time in years, I danced. Slowly, quietly, alone but not lonely. The air felt lighter, my body freer. When the song ended, I left the record spinning in silence, the needle tracing the soft static of peace. I picked up the phone and played back the old voicemail I'd saved from Richard's number. It was the last thing he ever recorded, a message he'd left 2 days before he died. I knew every word, every breath, every pause. "Phyllis, if they ever make you doubt yourself, remember who you are, and remember, the truth has its own timing." I smiled, tears slipping down my cheeks. "It does, Richard," I whispered. "It finally does." Outside, the wind stirred the trees, carrying the faint scent of lilac from the garden. The shadows lengthened across the floor, stretching toward the frame where our photo hung, glowing softly in the evening light. I stood there, my hand resting on the back of the chair he'd once claimed as his own, and felt the quiet fill every corner of the room. For 6 years, I had lived in the noise of grief and guilt. Now there was only stillness, and in that stillness, love. As the final rays of sunlight touched the glass, I whispered the last words I would ever speak to him aloud. Truth has its own timing, and it's right on time. Then I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow of the frame in the dusk. A promise fulfilled, a love remembered, and a silence that finally meant peace.